Hey, what's up, stock compounders? Brad here. So recently, Monish Pabrai gave a talk at the National University of Singapore. And in that talk, he was asked, what great investors do you recommend cloning or learning from? And Monish Pabrai pointed out Chuck Akre. And so what I decided to do is comb through this Google talk from Chuck Akre from 2017. And I noticed a number of you have been doing that as well. I left a comment, and you guys who have seen this Monish Pabrai talk have been engaging with it. So that's pretty fun. But in this video, I'm going to share my highlights from Chuck Akre's talk at Google about 5 years ago. So I like how he starts here. He was pre-med in college, and then he became an English major. Okay, nothing to do with business or investing. He's trying to figure out. He's trying to solve this investment puzzle, basically from scratch. And I have a lot of respect for that. So the questions he asked himself: what makes a great investor, and what makes a great investment? Okay, two different questions that are so core to really winning this game long term, this game of investing. So there's a book he mentions right away, John Train's The Money Masters. And in this book, and I haven't seen this in this book before, Buffett gives the characteristics of a great business and the characteristics of what makes a great investor. So you better believe I am getting my hands on this book, and you guys are going to be some of the first to see what Buffett had to say about basically his answers to these two questions. What makes a great investor? What makes a great business in terms of an investment? Another book he plugged was 100 to 1 in the stock market. That really helped Akre appreciate the value of compounding. Okay, the incredible power when you can make an investment in a business and make 100 times or even more on that. Akre has two companies in the portfolio now that have been 100 baggers. Okay, Berkshire Hathaway and American Tower. And I actually calculated it. So American Tower has been a 307 bagger since Akre basically took his biggest position. Most of the buying in American Tower was done around 80 cents per share. So it's up 307 times since then. And of course, Berkshire Hathaway, he started buying shares, I think it was in the late 70s at $105. And this is for the A shares, okay? So that's a 4,508 bagger from that $105 share price until today. So, incredible just to notice within those 200 baggers, how much of a difference there is, right? A 4,500 bagger versus a 300 bagger. And that really points to, if you can get one incredible investment in the portfolio, it will have dramatically outsized impact on the performance of the portfolio. It's a really important lesson there. The greater lesson here is, how do you identify these great long-term compounders? And how do you have the conviction, the fortitude to hold these things when things aren't looking so great for those businesses? That is perhaps the biggest challenge of this game that we're playing. He points out rate of return is the bottom line of all investing. With Akre Capital Management, really the sole objective is to achieve a higher rate of return while taking lower risk, while taking less risk. And that's a very powerful, concise sort of target as an investor. He points out the U.S. stock market has grown between 9 and 10% per year over the last basically 100 years. Okay, the last century, 9 and 10% per year, outperforming all other asset classes. Now, Chuck Akre asks why. Why has this asset class done between 9 and 10%? And the reason is it approximates what these companies are earning on the shareholders' capital, the return on equity. Free cash flow return, subtracting maintenance capex on the owner's capital, okay, the capital employed. So return on equity, return on capital employed. These are what Chuck Akre really pays attention to. And we're going to get into the three-legged stool. This is the first leg, okay? A rate of return of the business. Our return in an asset will approximate the return on equity over a period of years, given constant valuation and given the absence of any distributions. So because of that, we work hard to have an attractive valuation at the start, not paying too much for a great business. Your opportunity for a higher rate of compounding is enhanced by a lower valuation at the start. That's pretty obvious to most of us. If you're able to buy into a company and you can get a 10x over 10 years, if you were able to buy in at half that, it would have been a 20x. Okay, so if you can buy in cheaper, you're radically impacting the kind of the long-term performance, your long-term performance on that particular investment. How is it that we identify an investment which will likely lead us to an above average rate of return, right? How do we find these companies that are going to give us an above average rate of return? So that gets us to the three-legged stool. Okay, the three-legged stool really symbolizes three elements that must be present to make a great investment. The first leg is a high return business. Okay, it's a quality business. Most of us kind of have a sense for what these are. Chuck Akre talked a lot about MasterCard in this video. Also Moody's, the ratings agency, and American Tower as well was discussed quite a bit in this one. He talks about how MasterCard makes 34% after tax on earnings. Okay, the average company, the average public company, generates maybe 7%, 8% after tax on earnings. Okay, so MasterCard could have twice to get down to the average business. Okay, it's a 4x better on this metric. So why? What is it about MasterCard that's causing these unbelievable rates of returns to occur? That's for us to dig into. The second leg, so that's the first leg, high quality business, which is high returns. Second leg, people who run the business, the quality of the people. All right, so we've got quality of the business, quality of the people is the second leg. Demonstrated record of being fantastic at operating their business. Okay, so you look at the track record of the management team. Is it clear that they are exceptionally skilled at managing this business? And do they treat us as shareholders as partners? Okay, are they funneling those earnings, the rewards of the business? Are the rewards being funneled to the shareholders, or is management really hoarding those rewards? So they got to treat us as partners. The third leg is reinvestment. Okay, and this is really kind of the compounder element. Reinvestment. If a business has a great high return on the owner's capital, we would love for them to be able to take all the free cash they generate and put it back into that business. to continue to earn those high rates of return, right? That's the compounding. You want to earn high rates on not just your original investment, but what you're earning each and every year, okay? That's textbook compounding. And of course, if they can reinvest at those high rates of return, this is way more efficient than paying dividends, where it's taxed multiple times. And then at the end of the day, you've got to figure out what to do with it as the investor, right? The process, this three-legged stool process is designed to help me have focus as it relates to how we're going to invest, okay? So it's very concise, okay? There's not a ton of things that need to be answered here. There's really three questions. Is it a high-quality business? Okay? If so, what makes it a high-quality business? Are the people who run it of high integrity and skilled, okay, quality people? And do they have reinvestment opportunities to continue growing this thing with the great earnings that they're making today? So those are three crucial questions for Chuck Akre when looking at an investment. Let's see. The businesses we own typically have more growth, okay? And growth is really just, if you have reinvestment opportunities, you're going to have growth, okay? So it's almost a prerequisite here that a company has growth in order to fit this three-legged stool. Have higher returns on capital, have stronger balance sheets that kind of addresses the lower risk piece, strong balance sheet, and frequently lower valuations. Okay, so you're going to get opportunities to get into these great businesses because of the greater volatility of the market, because Mr. Market is driven by humans that are driven by fear and greed. So if we have all that in place, we identify a great business, great people, reinvestment opportunities. That's what the watch list is for, right? We're waiting for that price to be attractive. And if it keeps going down, keeps getting more attractive, put more and more capital to work in it. Volatility is not risk, okay? Chuck Akre says volatility is really only risk in the short term, okay? If you know you're going to need that money that you're investing in the short term, that's when volatility can be your enemy, because you might have to pull it out at a time that's not desirable in terms of your portfolio value. But over the long term, volatility is the friend of the right long-term intelligent investor, because it gives us opportunities to buy in when the market is pricing something irrationally low. Okay, so that's I think a positive way to look at volatility, that most market participants don't see it that way. They want this smooth ride off into the sunset. But for investors who really understand individual companies, know what they're worth, volatility is fantastic for allowing us to get in at a really attractive entry point. Let's see. So he talks about interest rates, right? Over the last 40 years or so, the lowering interest rates have been a huge tailwind for investors. Where we're at today, it's a headwind. Okay, so I think that's important to keep in mind. That and part of that is, when we're looking at returns, we really need to compare that to what the returns of the market are, right? And the returns of the market are likely to be less moving forward because of where we're at right now with interest rates. Interest rates are really gravity in terms of valuations for public companies. So Chuck Akre was able to compound at 12.7% over 27 years compared to the S&P, which did 9.4. Okay, so more than 3% annual outperformance for 27 years. Huge impact that makes. This is the outcome of using this thought process in our investments, the three-legged stool kind of framework. So he gives a few examples. I'm not going to spend much time on these. You can watch the Google talk if you want to look at International Speedway Corp, Penn National Gaming. He talks about MasterCard. So one thing I'll note about MasterCard, he said about MasterCard, the returns are so high that they can't possibly find another place to reinvest their money at that rate. Okay. Nice problem to have, but still a problem in terms of high rates of compounding. Compounding is diminished modestly because of that. They buy back a lot of stock, MasterCard does. They pay a dividend. They invest in a lot of new technologies. And it's hard. They're limited in terms of how much they can reinvest back into the business. And Pabrai talked about this, I think, late last year in terms of Tencent and how, Tencent, they have this army of software engineers where they can generate like 65% on kind of reinvested capital. But they can't use that much of their huge earnings pool for that piece of the business because they can't hire engineers fast enough in order to use much of that free cash flow. So they have to go to their next best option, which are these digital Warren Buffetts, where they're generating 35%, which, if your second best choice is 35%, that's pretty good, but it's nowhere near the 65% with their kind of core business. Moody's talks a little bit about Moody's. It's interesting. He compared Moody's to S&P Global, and if you look at S&P Global and Moody's over the last 10 years, they have basically the same compound annual growth rate. Moody's is 24%, S&P is 25%. Okay, so they're nearly both 10x's over the last decade. But Chuck Akre points out during the great financial crisis of 2008, he looked into it and he thinks S&P Global, the integrity wasn't there as much as it was with Moody's. And so that's why Akre hasn't taken a position in S&P. To date, he's only stuck with Moody's. So let's see. The three-legged stool approach to finding businesses that are likely to give us a return that's above average. He says good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Okay, he got a chuckle from the crowd from that. And that's really, a mistake isn't a mistake if you really learn from it. Because the whole game here, as an investor, is continuous learning, compounding, basically good judgment. Okay? And the only way to do that is to make a lot of mistakes. And hopefully not the same mistake twice, right? Because that means you haven't learned from it. But mistakes, it's par for the course in this game. He talks about how we work in a town with one traffic light. Okay, this makes me think of Buffett, who lives in Omaha. And then, it seems like a lot of great investors have intentionally kind of lived away from, the hustle and bustle of Wall Street. Makes the decision process much simpler. Okay, if you live in San Francisco or if you live in New York City, you're going to have all these smart people who are pitching you things. And it's going to be very easy to get outside of sort of your simple core competency, right? Your circle of competence. So that's why Chuck Akre has done that. Makes the decision process much simpler. You don't get distracted away from what you do well. So Chuck has clearly defined what it is that they do, what it is that they look for, and they don't want to be around people who are incredibly intelligent, but are pulling them in all of these different directions. He just doesn't think that's going to produce a good outcome. Let's see. We're almost done here. Yep, so on selling. Okay, he's asked about selling. The most difficult thing to do as a long-term investor is to not sell. All right? This concept of holding for a long enough period where you can really reap the rewards of a great business, compounding over many years. The ones that are really great have been hard for me to identify. Okay? So, I mean, that's the whole game, right? How do we identify these great companies managed by great people that have these opportunities to reinvest and grow, orders of magnitude from where they are today? How do we identify those? That has not been easy for Chuck Akre, which makes sense, right? If it were easy, those opportunities wouldn't exist nearly to the extent that they do. It's taken me a long time to understand how good the ones are that are really good. So this goes back to MasterCard. Why? How is it doing this well? How are the margins so high? Okay. Really getting into the DNA of the business. What makes it tick? And as Pabrai also pointed out not that long ago, great businesses don't want everyone to know what makes them tick. Okay? Because if everyone understood what made them tick, maybe regulators would get involved because it's clearly a monopoly, or competitors would know how to come in and attack that business and take share away from it. So, our job as investors is to really understand what makes these great businesses tick. And the company doesn't want us necessarily. They don't want anyone to understand what really makes that company great. So it's a huge challenge, okay? But obviously the rewards are also huge when you can find these 100, 1,000, whatever, baggers that really transform the portfolio just from that one bet. Let's see. And obviously, if there's a disappointing quarter or whatever for a business, I mean, you look at what's happened to Amazon throughout its life, dropping, I think, like 70 or 80%, like 3 different times. If you imagine what it's like to hold on to something like that as it's going through that kind of turbulence, very difficult, very, very difficult. He talks about how, MasterCard, I believe Akre was first into MasterCard, and then they hit concentration limits for whatever reason. I don't know if it's, they don't want to have, business more than some percentage of the portfolio, or what the specification around that concentration limit was. But I guess they hit their limit on MasterCard, and so they went into Visa. Okay. Similar thing with American Tower. They went into SBAC because they just were kind of had a full position in American Tower, but still like the tower space. So they went into SBAC. That has not been the case, as I said before, with Moody's. They haven't gone into S&P Global. It sounds like because of that question around the integrity of the business, around the people in the business. So this was fantastic, guys, to dive into Chuck Akre's talk at Google. I know he did a podcast, I think a couple of years ago, with Invest Like the Best on that podcast. Let me know if you guys have seen anything else out there from Chuck Akre that I should dig into. I'm probably going to spend like maybe a few more days just digging into Chuck Akre because there's a lot of goodies here, and I want to really soak them all in. So, if you have any other suggestions on content from Chuck Akre, let me know in the comments. Send me a DM on Twitter as well. You can't really put links to things down in the comments. The algorithm doesn't like that very much. But you can DM them to me on Twitter. That'll work just fine. So without any further ado, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.